Welcome to Good Morning Hospitality, your one-stop shop for the latest news, noteworthy trends, and thought-provoking discussions across the industry. From hotels and short-term rentals to all things travel and hospitality, you'll find each episode equips you with the information you need to start your week. Join us on Good Morning Hospitality every Tuesday, wherever you get your podcasts. Good morning, Sarah.
Good morning, Leo. How's it going?
It's good. This feels like a reunion. I haven't seen you in so long, my friend.
It does. It's good to see you, buddy. It's really good to see you.
Come on, like it's been like I don't think we've been this long without seeing each other in so long. You've been globe trotting.
Yeah, I have been globetrotting. My parents came, flew into Barcelona, and we took them to Italy, and it was absolutely amazing. Although they got their original flight got rerouted for some reason because there was issues at the main airport when they left Colombia, where I'm from. And so they missed their connecting flight to Barcelona. So they had to get rerouted. So they were already stressed and then got rerouted to Zurich and then from Zurich to Barcelona. And 45 minutes after they took off from Zurich, the blackout happened in Spain. So I had no way to know if their flight was landing or can planes even land without electricity? I don't know. Apparently they can. I had no idea what was going on and couldn't contact them. And they were in the air, so they didn't have data or anything anyway. I panicked trying to get to the airport. You would think it would be mayhem. Actually, love Spain. The bars, everyone was like, it's a Monday. We've had really terrible weather for the last 2 weeks. It's finally sunny. We don't have to work. Great. Everybody was at the bar. And the bars had something. We have cold beer, but not for long. Come get it while you can.
I love it. And for our non-European listeners, this was big news, right? It wasn't just Barcelona. The whole of Spain and Portugal went down, didn't it? The whole mainland, right?
It was madness. And I think the craziest thing is we couldn't get information because we're so used to getting all of our information from online news sources. And so nobody knew what was going on. You would hear on the street, oh, I hear it's all of Italy, Spain, Portugal, and France, and it's a terrible, cyber attack. Like you hear all kinds of stuff. And so you have no idea what's going on. I still think the official explanation they've given is quite dodgy, but oh well. But it was madness. It was, none of the street lamps were working. And so imagine a big 5 or 6 lane main road in Barcelona. Try and cross that with no lights, it was absolute madness. The traffic was ridiculous. It was a madhouse. People were trapped in the metro.
People were trapped in elevators, right? You had people
were trapped in elevators in the metro. And the power went off at maybe 12, I think. And in my flat, I got power back at 7:30 at night, but I know people who didn't get it until the next morning. So it was madness, but I will say I just love the Spanish resilience. It was life gives you lemons. We are going to make sangria. Forget the lemonade. Straight to sangria. So that made me feel good. Yeah. And my parents were like, what do you mean? Everybody's just partying on the street. I don't think this is dangerous when they landed and I told them. And we got to the airport and it took me the Aerobus that I normally take that takes 30 minutes without fail. They just weren't coming. There was just no buses. They couldn't get there.
They were drinking sangria in the bars.
Yeah. Well, I ended up in the bank in the bus line. We got with 2 other people. And we're like, should we just try and flag down a taxi and share a taxi? What do we do? So we did. And we ended up getting a taxi, but it took us over an hour to get to the airport in a taxi. It was madness. And then there were my parents, they're not frequent travelers. And I was so nervous. I was thinking, oh gosh, the one thing I told them was when I could get a little bit of signal was whatever you do, don't leave the airport. I'm on my way. And what did they do? They left the airport. So they crossed the street and they were sat on a park bench. Oh my God, we to never found them. But yeah, they were here and the trip to Italy was amazing.
Were you in Italy for the death of the Pope, the arrival of the new Pope? I kept thinking of you. I was like, wow, Sarah is in Italy at a very important time.
Yeah, no. And we didn't go to Rome either, which was for me, it was fine. I'm not super religious and it just would have ruined my vacation, I think, to have everything shut down. So it was totally fine. But Mauro's cousin was in Rome the day that the Pope died, and he actually had tickets to get into the Vatican, and they Like he got to the door and they were like, nope, come back tomorrow. Pope's dead.
There you go.
So,
Wow. So
yeah.
it's such a mad time, wasn't it? Such a mad time. But yeah, Italy is beautiful as ever, I assume.
Yeah, it was absolutely fabulous. We did I think, I don't know, I'm still working out what is the perfect amount of activities versus leisure, because I often, I have this sort of terrible sin, which is that I want to see so many things that I feel like then I need a holiday after my holiday to recuperate. I think my parents felt the same way. My mom was like, did you schedule in a nap at any point? I was like, no. Yuri. So the next trip I plan with them will include naps.
Well, look, you are the king of itineraries, as you like to tell us. I feel like it depends, right? If you're bringing someone over from the States, you probably feel like it's a big trip. They've got to see so much, right? They can't just fly back for 2 hours to go and see it if they miss something. So for me, it's about how far I've traveled, I guess, as to whether I think I do have a bit of a restless energy. I like to see stuff, but then by 5 o'clock on a holiday, it's time to drink a cold beer and watch the sun go down, isn't it?
Yeah, and I think that's sort of where I went wrong on some of it, because in my mind things weren't going to take that long, as long as they did. And so I had planned, I don't know, we'll visit like these 3 towns, and like you're not even in the second town and it's almost lunchtime and you're like, right, well, one of these is going to go.
I'm losing a town right now. I'm losing a town.
Yeah, I was like, pick a town, any town. These are your 2. My dad's like, I know nothing about them. It doesn't matter. Just pick.
Well, look, we're going to go into, I'm glad it was a good trip. We're going to go into what to do in a blackout as a property manager later. I think this is a good article to look at, given what you've been going through in Spain. All I can say very quickly about Brighton life is this: we've had 2 weeks of sunshine, as you can tell by my suntan. Swimming, kids on the beach, like it's been pretty dreamy down here. Had a very interesting time yesterday. Went to Brighton Fringe Festival, which is obviously not as world famous as Edinburgh Fringe Festival, but you get a lot of the Edinburgh performers in Brighton preparing their material. We went to a kid show with our 2 little ones, and I got talking to the performer afterwards. He'd sort of put himself into a giant balloon. I'd highly recommend it if you feel like a bit of a fun afternoon. It wasn't just people with kids there. There were people who wanted to see this guy get into a giant balloon. So it was fab. And I got chatting to him, and I said, "Oh, well, I guess you're preparing for Edinburgh." And he said, "No, I'm not going to Edinburgh because I can't find any accommodation. It's too expensive." And it's all getting too expensive. So Edinburgh City Council, if you are listening, I assume you are, this is what happens when you ban short-term rentals in your city, is you make it too expensive for performers. And we got into a real chat about it. And I thought, oh God, I must tell Sarah, because here we are. We've talked about this on the pod. We're getting into that time of year where people are starting to prep and plan if they're going to go and do festivals as performers. If the talent goes elsewhere, the festival suffers. So look, that's a little sort of warning from me, Sarah.
Yeah, I hear you. Did somebody tell him about the fact that he can sleep in a cemetery? Because that's a highly enticing option.
He actually told me instead he'd booked to go. It made more economic sense for him to go and work a festival in Sydney, Australia. So, what does that tell you? What does that tell you?
Madness.
So we're missing out. People of Scotland will not be seeing a man fit into a giant balloon this summer, and that's a tragedy. Look, here we are. Here we are. It's hotting up. Summer's landed. Forget about the grey skies today. Summer has landed, and with it has come a slew of articles around what everyone's doing this summer. Sarah and I were back and forth this week discussing this one because it's exactly the kind of article we thought would be coming. Britain's increasingly swapping the Med's busy hotspots for the craze known as destination duping. Sarah, this was a new phrase to me. New to you too?
It was new to me. The dupe. I understood the concept. In fact, I get bombarded on social media all the time with like beautiful images of like, this isn't Italy, this isn't Spain, this isn't whatever, it's wherever. And then actually you look at real photos and it looks not that nice. So, I got one the other day I won't say the name. I don't want to send anyone, but it was someplace off the coast of Africa, like a set of islands or something. And it was like, there's nobody here. It's wonderful. And then when like I got on YouTube and it was like the real truth about why nobody's here. Like, look at the beach. This is whatever they did was fake. I don't know. So
yeah, that's a really important. Well, that's a really important element, I think, of this discussion. We talk about it a lot on the pod, how increasingly bookings are coming from, and interest is coming from social media influencers and TikTok, Instagram, Reels, things of that nature. And the authenticity of that is questionable, right? But let's not start. Let's start with my optimistic hat on, because, as I like to say, optimists have more fun. Britons are increasingly turning away from classic Mediterranean hotspots. There's an article in the Guardian. So the likes of Malaga and Benidorm, and favouring less touristic, affordable alternatives such as Bosnia, Herzegovina, Montenegro, and Albania. All names you'll be hearing next weekend at Eurovision, countries you've probably never visited, let alone considered as a tourist place. But again, I can see it. The Mediterranean has, people are thinking about Albania instead of Greece. I've also heard Northern Macedonia instead of Greece. Montenegro instead of Croatia. I mean, they're effective. It's effectively the same coast. You've got the Mediterranean there, and then obviously Bosnia. You've got Sarajevo and coastal areas too. Mostly that would be more of a cultural trip. I think Bosnia would be to do the historic city of Sarajevo. Makes a lot of sense. In 2024 alone, UK flights to Bosnia rose 284%. Now, I'm no mathematician, but that sounds like a lot. Montenegro by 164% and Albania by 61%. They're saying it's driven by trends in travel. So TikTok influencers, even podcasters potentially getting a mention here, Sarah. So we're all as guilty as this. But it might be something to do with this discussion, this point that we've had on the pod about how Gen Z travelers are looking for something where they're escaping the crowds. Maybe they're the first to experience something. They're not necessarily keen to go to the hotspots that their parents went to. It also maybe comes into the fact that there's not as much money swimming around. So you can get more bang for your buck in these places, because Italy's very expensive. I'm sure you were thinking that when you were there. France is incredibly expensive. Spain less so, but still more expensive than Bosnia, I would imagine. So you've got these trends driving people to try new destinations in Europe. We love that. We talked about that last summer. So we love to see it, and I can't wait to see the data later on in the summer about it. And then the big one, we've got a socially conscious generation growing up below us who are really concerned about over-tourism, and the news of water pistols in Barcelona, tourists not welcome in the Canary Islands, is starting to have an impact, is starting to bite. People are doing their research and thinking, where do I go and have the least controversial experience? And also, where am I welcomed by locals? So yeah, very, very interesting. I know you'll have opinions.
Yeah, I do. I mean, first of all, I think as long as they're really cool destinations, I love the idea. I love the concept. I think that you have to be really clear about what it is you're looking for on your holiday. If what you're looking for is a cheaper alternative and fewer crowds, I think that's wonderful. For me, I think the challenge I have is that part of the experience and part of what I love about going to France or Italy or Spain, or it's the cultural aspect as well. And I remember, I don't know, even when I went to Croatia, it was like, I kind of had the thought of like, well, and I'm spoiled, obviously. I live in Spain. I have the Costa Brava like an hour and a half away. And like, kind of my thought was like, it took me like 7 hours to get here to this island in the middle of nowhere, and it kind of isn't better than the Costa Brava, and the food would have been better in Costa Brava, and I would have been able to communicate more with people, and I would have had a more enjoyable, authentic experience. And so I think it's really clear, like for me, I know what I'm looking for, and what I'm looking for in a holiday is very different. It's not just a great deal. It's like every time I travel, I look for some place that I couldn't see at home. That is like a key thing for me. So it has to be either nature or some incredible kind of architecture or buildings. Like I'm always looking for something different. But I think maybe for UK travelers, it's slightly different, right? Like, I mean, you guys have beaches, but you don't have a turquoisey, maybe in Ireland where you're not going to get in, in the water ever. But like you're
being very kind about this. You're normally much more rude. You're much more offensive about the UK weather.
You guys don't have nice beaches. Let's just be honest. Your beaches are not. I mean, it's like beaches in the north of France. Nobody wants to go there. It's not nice, Like you go there because you can't afford to go anywhere else, or because you want a different kind of glum beach experience. Which, trust me, there are some people who love that. Mauro is one of them. He loves disgusting weather and cloudy places and cold places and, very different. But it's not the same as like a beautiful Mediterranean holiday where you're sitting on a beach leisurely looking at beautiful turquoise water and reading a book and eating nice food. And so
I
I
agree.
think,
I agree. I think the weather's part of it for let's say Northern European travelers in general, okay? Because the
mm,
trend of Northern European travelers is probably got a bit more money in their pocket. Their currency's going to go a bit further when they go down to the Mediterranean, but they don't have the weather. We don't get the weather naturally. So yes, you go and find it, and you can be the novelty of being on a hot beach. And if you don't speak Spanish anyway, which the vast majority of UK travelers don't, there's no advantage to be had there. So I think it's a fair point. I also accept it that it's less interesting to someone who lives in a hot place. You live on the Mediterranean. That said, when it comes to the northern French, northern European beaches, I think that's your weekend traveler out of the city. Just come and be like, the weather wasn't great, but we walked on the beach. We had a lovely walk. We walked the dog. We hung out. We played beach games. I think that market is firmly and that's growing as a culture, right? Getting people out there for the weekend to try and experience something new. That culture is firmly growing in the UK, but still, everybody wants a hot holiday every summer. Culturally, that is the thing. Everyone wants to get on the plane and go somewhere hot. So if the places that they traditionally go to are overcrowded and more expensive, it makes sense that there's adjacent destinations, or destination dupes, as we can call them, that are going to benefit. And if you like the old towns in Croatia, there's some pretty nice old towns in Montenegro that are suddenly going to be the next thing to discover. For me, it makes total sense. For you, Sarah popping over for the weekend, less so potentially.
I think the other thing to consider there is infrastructure. So, one of the, I guess, counter sides to less traveled destinations is there's not a lot of infrastructure for tourists. I mean, it's something that I noticed, for example, when I went to Thailand. It's amazing. You cross over into Laos and there is nothing for tour. Like, good luck finding anybody who speaks English. Good luck finding any kind of tourist geared activities where it's just not set up. The infrastructure isn't there. And I know a lot of that comes with the popularity. But that's another thing to consider. I think Gen Z is way more open to like, oh, whatever, man, I've got my Google Translate on my phone and I'll just talk to whoever and I'll get it figured out and I'll get on a bus. And, it's like, for them, it's part of the experience, but like, I wouldn't take my parents to a place that doesn't have like proper infrastructure. So I don't know. I like it. I'm curious to see kind of where it goes. My cynical side says like, it's going to be the same. Like Croatia 10 years ago was the place to go where it was cheaper. And now Croatia is more expensive than anywhere in Spain, like on the coast. Yeah. So I don't know if it like actually is good or if it's just ruining more destinations with over.
Well, there you go. And that is one of the things I would also reference. I'm glad you brought it onto that. So Gen Z's the Gen Z culture for desire for authenticity in their travel experiences, right? Like you said, I'll just get on the bus. I'll just backpack. I'll just kind of make do with Google Translate because I'm not traveling with kids. I'm not traveling with parents. I do think God, this is going to make me sound old, and I don't want it to. But you do hit a certain age, and you're not as willing to rough it, right? You're not as interested in roughing it. You only get 2 weeks in the summer off. You want to make sure that it's a really nice, relaxing 2 weeks. But put that aside, I would get my backpack out and go to Montenegro. I would. When you're going there, you have to be thinking about the impact you're having, so that it does. And again, it falls on the policymakers in those areas to make sure that they're getting the type of visitor they want. And I think. I don't know. You wouldn't have been in you wouldn't have been in Europe at this point, but you may still be fully aware of this. That around the sort of turn of the century, there was a real drive towards people visiting destinations like Prague, like Amsterdam, maybe more like Prague, like Budapest. Suddenly, those areas felt open for business. Conflict had all but ended. Very, very cheap places to go and drink beer, and they suddenly became stag do destinations, and hen party destinations.
I think that you go through those stages. It's like cheap destination drives a different kind of tourist and a different kind of traveler. Barcelona had the same thing with this years ago. It was like you come to Barcelona, you rent a cheap Airbnb, and then it was just the streets in Barceloneta by the beach were just full of like drunk teenagers. It was terrible.
That's so true. I'd forgotten. I actually been on a stag do in Barcelona as well. I'd forgotten that a long time ago. And I had a full head of hair at the time. It was a long time ago. And it was very stag do. Yeah. And then your city goes through that whole process of like cleaning itself up again. And you'd probably rather avoid it going through that process. So I think, there's something in holding your nerve, making making sure accommodation is reasonably priced, but making sure that also you're not just, it's about trying to attract the visitor that you want. And we say that regularly, right? Alrighty, we could talk about this one all day. We're going to talk about it all summer. We're going to get the data, I'm sure, from AirDNA at some point, and we can look at how destinations are actually performing. But what I'm interested to know is property managers in Eastern Europe or these less traveled destinations, what are you seeing on the ground? I was in Bulgaria recently for a conference, as you know, and it's a huge growing market there. So look, if we've got anyone in Albania, Macedonia, or in any of these destinations that are typically hit by tourists during the summer that are seeing less interest than usual, please reach out. It'd be nice to know what's going on. Sarah, tell us about what you should do when you're running a short-term rental business during disruption.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think this was a really interesting article from Rental Scale Up, and the author Uvika Wahi was actually in Lisbon at the time of the blackouts and lives there. So it was a really interesting perspective because it's something that I kind of lived through, and also a lot of experiences when I was chatting about this with my parents. I think it was last year during the hurricane that came through South Carolina and North Carolina. My parents were without power or electricity, no Wi-Fi, nothing for 10 days. Leo.
Wow.
10 days. So I think here in Europe, we're so accustomed to like, oh, everything works and it's all wonderful because we don't have natural disasters and we don't have things like that. That's something that happens somewhere else. And I think that leaves us vulnerable to not being prepared. And so I remember my dad, when it happened, he's like, well, do you have this? And do you have that? And do you have these other things? And I'm like, no, like I've got candles and matches. Like, what else do you want? I just, and he was like, well, I can't believe you don't have this, that, and the other. And so I think a lot of that comes from experience. It comes from living in an area where, these things are more regular, unfortunately. And things like whether that's a backup generator, whether that's having alternative instructions for check-in, check-out, sending, and I think this is something that everyone should do, sending the instructions way ahead in advance of the booking, right? I'm talking at least, 48 hours ahead of time, because I think about this all the time. Like, imagine you're a traveler. When my parents first get here, they don't have data. They don't have anything on their phones until I go and get them a SIM card, So there's so many things that, like, if you just send the check-in instructions 7 hours before check-in or 5 hours or whatever it is, the people who are checking in might not get that. So I think that's a good practice anyway, sending the instructions early. Another good point was having a hideaway key, and sending instructions, urging people either to print those or screenshot them on their phones. Having a hideaway key, like that's a real physical key somewhere in case of emergencies. Having a welcome booklet. And as part of that welcome booklet, always have emergency numbers. I think about this all the time when I first came to Europe. So it sound really American, but I was thinking, oh gosh, like I saw somebody get hit on their bike in the street, and I was like, oh, I need to call the cops, and I called 911, not 112. Now I think they've rerouted it for other idiots like me who don't know the emergency numbers in Europe, and now 911 goes straight to 112. But back in the day, it didn't, right? So something that simple, especially if you have travelers that are coming from, I don't know, maybe somewhere in Asia, they don't know these things. So I think having emergency contacts is really important. Also, local centers of like, hey, this is where you can go if you need this, or having something as simple as like having a radio. I saw a bunch of people, like usually older people, out on the street that had these like battery powered radios, and they had somehow connected it to like a speaker system from one of the bars, and everybody was just sat outside listening to this, like one of my neighbors' radios, to figure out what was going on. So something like that, a way of communication. I had some neighbors that had like walkie-talkies and like went and took them to some older neighbors that were like, a couple floors up. And so they couldn't get the lift back down, and said, hey, if you need anything, let us know. This walkie works. So I don't know if it needs to be that extreme, but for sure, check-in instructions that make sense, a real actual physical hideaway key somewhere else. And also just like the basics, right? Like have some candles. If you can have some sort of generator or backup system, great. And then somebody to contact. And of course, in this particular scenario, like you couldn't even use your phone. So that's not really helpful, but at least a point of, hey, you can go here if something happens. to get more information, or recommending that people travel with a little bit of cash. Always. I mean, I was so lucky that day, the blackout, that I had cash. I never have cash ever, ever, ever. And for some reason I had taken some out because I couldn't get my like Zoom payment thing to work for a friend. And so I went and took out some cash, and thank goodness I had some, because otherwise I never, never, never carry cash. And you couldn't pay with a credit card for anything. It was all cash,
I never have any money at all on me. I'd have been done. I'd have been done by that.
You wouldn't, because you would. I mean, literally, at the bars, if the people that knew you, I mean, they were just writing down, like, take people's tab and just said, "Come pay me tomorrow." That was crazy, I mean, but if you don't know them, they're probably not going to do that. So I think, yeah, a little bit of cash, having alternate check-in methods for sure, emergency contact numbers or emergency places that people can go if and when something like this does happen. And then the other thing that I thought was a really interesting one, which I think everybody should do in their short-term rental anyway. I've heard this for numerous reasons all the time, but spend a full night in your short-term rental in general, right? To see what's like, try and cook a full meal, try and see what's going on. But especially in terms of this blackout stuff, turn off the main power source. Good luck. Spend a night there, and then you're going to find the gaps. I want you to do the check-in process. I want you to try and cook something, which means, I mean, I was lucky my kitchen is gas, and so I could actually cook, but I have tons of friends who everything's electric. I mean, they couldn't even boil water, they couldn't do anything. So having, I think just going through that experience and seeing, okay, what are the things that I would have wanted, or what am I missing about this? So the other, like, even instructions about like how to control the thermostat, right? So many of these apartments now, everything's smart locks, smart thermostat, smart everything. And even in some buildings, which I didn't realize because I had water the whole time, but apparently some buildings have electrical pumps that pump the water through the building, which means some people didn't even have water.
Wow. Yeah.
Madness.
I mean, it is total madness, isn't it? I think I like this. I like the actionable insights that you've given here. I agree with all of them. The one or two I would re-emphasize, because I think that everything you've said is right. As an industry, we talk about this a lot. This need to be professional, be a professional actor. And when I think, but it's fair to say for both of us, when we both talk about being professional on the pod, we're not talking about necessarily being the largest property manager in town, right? Professionalism and having 500 listings is not necessarily, they don't necessarily go together. They can, obviously, but it's, you could have one listing and you could be the most professional host, or you could have 500 and be the most professional host. And that's where those little attention to detail points that you've referenced are really going to come back to the benefit of your guest. Capturing enough data in advance to make sure that you can contact them. You have different ways to contact them, sending them things so they have full visibility of them, but also having the bandwidth to be able to go door to door and visit your guests and check in on them, because you might have to do that. You might have to send, if you've got lots of properties, you might have to send several people into the field. If you've got one or two, you might have to spend the day in the field. Just turning up with a bottle of water for everybody and, seeing how can I help you? And as you say, if they don't have cash, like just treating them to some stuff that you're going to get back later, in a bank transfer. So it goes back to a theme we've talked about a lot, especially over the last 2 months, it feels like, which is service and making sure that we are being hospitality providers. And that is a really good opportunity, because if it's just the days of like throw up a listing on an OTA and leave it and it's done are over, and you need to be providing a service to people so that they feel communicated with. And again, if you're a guest, it's the reason why you should try and book with someone that's reputable, and you've done your research on the host and the property manager to make sure that that you're being looked after in destination. And that goes back to what happens if something goes wrong, but also, are they testing the smoke alarms, the carbon monoxide alarms, all of that stuff that makes sure that you and your family are safe. As a consumer, you have to think about that. And as a property manager, you're going to catch more fish if you do all of that. You work in that way.
Yeah, I think you're totally right. I think that the key here is the professionalization and kind of going back to our roots. I know we say it all the time, but this is what hyperlocal allows. I mean, the day that the blackout happened, I did the same. I went because I didn't know what was happening. I didn't know it was like a general blackout. and I was around the corner from my rental flat, and I just walked in and knocked on the door and just said, "Hey, is everything okay?" And they're like, "Yeah, we don't have any electricity." And I said, "Yeah, nobody has electricity. If you need something, go here, go here, go here." And I went to those like little shops around that I know people, whether it's a cafe or whatever, and just said, "Hey, if these guys come in, like, can you give them water? I'll pay, like, I'll pay you later." Like, they know me, and they were taken care of. And that makes a huge difference. Especially when you're in a country that isn't your home place, where maybe you don't speak the language. Like, that's huge.
Yeah, I agree. Well done, you. Tell me, we're out of time, but we've got to talk about it quickly because it would be remiss not to. So we've had the Airbnb Q1 earnings. We've had the Booking.com earnings, which are slightly stronger. But so Airbnb report $2.3 billion in revenue in Q1, a 6% increase year over year. They have mentioned the fact that Easter and Leap Day both fell in Q1 in 2024. So adjusting for that, they're saying that would be revenue growth of 11%. When they look forward to Q2, they're talking about potentially seeing double-digit growth. Booking.com slightly better growth story, especially in its STR category. So they're seeing the growth there. They're growing against their hotel vertical, and that's where a lot of their increased revenue is coming from, which is very interesting. So as a consequence, it's, I think, causing this is why Airbnb is saying hotel tonight is suddenly more important for them. I guess, we talk about this, the idea that you're on a city map on Booking.com or Airbnb or Vrbo, you just want to see flags that you can book, and Booking.com have a huge advantage is that you see hotels and short-term rentals side by side. I'm not saying we're going to see Airbnb go that far that quickly, but they are, I think they're going to have to take hotels more seriously. We've obviously got the summer release happening today, so we'll be able to talk about that more next week. But I think generally we're seeing a sign of the times. People are a little bit unsure about what they're doing at the moment, with the economic outlook being a bit uncertain. Should clear up, I assume, and booking windows are shortening anyway, so we should see, I think Q2 will be very revealing of how the year is going to go down, and I think we will see bookings start to pick up. But it's interesting because it feels like everyone's just they're taking a beat, having a think about things, and it is slightly meaning that in general travel stocks are probably not as interesting as they were, or people thought they would be in the year 2025. So yeah, what do you think, Sarah?
Yeah, I think this is a really interesting one because one of the main things I focused on in the Airbnb earnings was their mention of hotels, of like, this is how we're going to be competitive. And I think a lot of that is driven by all of the restrictions that are coming into place for short-term rentals in a lot of the major European cities and in parts of the US as well. They have to have hotel stock or they're going to completely lose those markets. And I think they realize that. And so it's very clear. I mean, they've made it really clear, not only with the Hotel Tonight, but like in the coming years, their goal is to push hotel inventory. And I think it's one of the only things that's going to allow them to be semi-competitive with Booking.com in the same way, right? That Vrbo is heavily dependent on the US market. Airbnb is wholly dependent pretty much on short-term rentals. And so I think they're realizing if they're going to stay around, I think that's why they're pushing into experiences. They're pushing into hotels. They're trying to diversify. Let's see if it works. I think for me, like when I think about an Airbnb, if they have like small boutique hotels on there, which is kind of what they originally launched with, I think that kind of inventory makes sense, or a bed and breakfast or something like that. When it gets into like, I don't know, a 200-room Marriott in Barcelona city center, I don't know if I see it. Because I just wouldn't think to go to Airbnb, I guess, to book that. But maybe it's, maybe I guess if you're on Airbnb and you see this, but I don't know. I'm not convinced. I think they have to do it to stay competitive, but I'm not convinced it's going to be as easy as I think they think it is.
I agree, and I think that there isn't a whole load of really bougie boutique hotels in city centres. There's a lot of really bang average, quite corporate hotels that you are going to have to embrace. And Booking.com has no problem having anything on there, and then they let you look at the reviews and decide if you want it or not. They are a marketplace. This, to me, comes into, and I wish we had a bit longer, but we can talk about it next week, I'm sure. What does Airbnb want to be? Because you can't be everything to everybody. You can't have a marketing campaign that kind of disses hotels and then at the same time embraces hotels. You can't be a booking platform as well as a we're going to have a lot of control over how people can run their hosting business and almost become a de facto technology provider to short-term rental hosts that mean they don't need a PMS and they don't need to go off platform host marketplace. So this summer release is going to be so interesting. What are they going to focus on? Is it about growth? Is it about becoming the more of a booking channel across the vertical? Or is it more about deep diving with short-term rentals and providing extra tools for hosts? I don't think you can do both. And I think it's slightly naive to think that you can, because as you say, and you're an Airbnb customer, have been an Airbnb customer over the years, as most of us have, you have an idea of what an Airbnb is. That's been built up over the last 15 years, that brand understanding of what an Airbnb is. And when you walk into a bad Airbnb, you go, oh, that's a bad Airbnb, because you know what a good one is. When you walk into a boutique hotel, you're not thinking about that. And so, yeah, I think it's a very, very, very interesting time. Hold the front page. Let's see what we get today in the summer release.
Yeah, let's see. I'm excited to talk about it next week with you, Leo.
Good. Clear your schedule, because we've got that, and we're going to have to talk in very great detail about the Eurovision Song Contest. So, just be ready.
I'm so excited.
You might need 2 hours, okay? You might need 2 hours. The editors are going to have a field day, aren't they? Okay, gang. Sarah, so nice to be reunited with you. Let's never go this long without speaking to each other. It's hard when you're on holiday. I miss you.
I know. I'm so sorry. I broke your heart.
You did. And then later this week, we've got a UK market review that I did with Dale Smith, CEO and founder of Host and Stay, for our audience to enjoy as well. What's been happening in the UK market so far in 2025. So, gang, if you've enjoyed today's show, please hit like, share, subscribe, and all the usual social places. And until next week, we look forward to seeing you then. Cheers.